Randy Barth is my guest. He is the CEO and founder of Think Together. We're going to learn about Project 2 Million and what he's working on. Thank you so much, Randy, for being on the program today.
Larry, thank you for having me on. It's really a pleasure.
So, a little bit about Think Together. What is Think Together?
Think Together is a nonprofit education organization that operates statewide in California. We're headquartered in Santa Ana. And we do two things. We offer what are termed wraparound programs, so programs that are support systems that wrap around the schools, public schools, public and charter schools. And we provide after-school programs, summer programs, and early childhood programs, primarily for low-income students. And then we have a school consulting arm that does systems change work in chronically underperforming schools and districts.
Take us into the issue. We're talking about wraparound services. We're talking about helping schools. We're talking about helping those in need, kids. How did this come about?
So we started as a volunteer effort down in Orange County in 1994 after a gang shooting in a particular neighborhood. And I was a Newport Beach stockbroker, and I was a volunteer at our church, and I headed up the mission committee. And it was during the 1990s. There was a lot of gang issues. There are today, but it was really at a crisis point across Southern California, across the nation. And there was a gang shooting in this particular neighborhood in Westside Costa Mesa, and the local newspaper, the Daily Pilot, ran a story, and the mothers in that neighborhood were organizing to take the neighborhood back from the gang. And so a friend of mine was a Catholic priest, and I called him and I said, is there something we could be doing as churches to help the mothers in the neighborhood? So we went and met with them, and they said what we need is a safe, quiet place for our kids to study after school in the neighborhood. 'Cause the parents all spoke Spanish, low income, working a couple jobs. The kids were bused to school and dropped back in the neighborhood with nothing to do. And that particular neighborhood was a bunch of high-density apartments that were ringed by light industrial properties. And so any parks or libraries or anything for kids to do after school was in a different gang territory. So the kids were literally trapped in the neighborhood. And they were not doing well in school and so forth. So we rented a 3-bedroom apartment in the neighborhood, thinking we were going to have 30 kids and a handful of tutors from the churches. And the first day we had 100 kids at our door. And we had no idea what we were doing, but there were a group of retired teachers that were part of the volunteer corps, and they went in and kind of made that place a little school in the neighborhood. And from that one street, we've sent over 400 kids to college, and the first 150 or so have graduated. We have a 2-time Emmy Award-winning TV producer. We have architects, engineers. We had our first kid graduate from medical school last year, and this spring we had our first student graduate from Harvard. So we saw with the right support system that these kids could achieve the same potential. They have the same potential as anybody else, but they had to have a good support system. And then later, we found we got more sophisticated. We started looking at what's happening in the school day as well.
The organization is Think Together. My guest is CEO, founder Randy Barth. Now, take us to this project called Project 2 Million. What is that?
So Project 2 Million, in California, we have about 6 million public school students. That includes traditional public schools and charter schools. And so about half of our students are operating on grade level, and there's about 1 million students that are operating a little bit below grade level, but there's about 2 million students that are failing by almost any standard. And most of those students are African American and Latino students. So our student population in California, we have every place, the nation, California has something called the achievement gap. And so where white and Asian students significantly outperform their African American and Latino peers. And so in California today, 60% of our students are African American or Latino, about 54% Latino, and about 6% of African American. So you have this huge outcome disparity that is permeating now, and it's gone on for a long time. It's now permeating our workforce. And so in California, the over 50, age 50 workforce in California is the most educated workforce in the world, and the under 35 workforce is the least educated workforce in the developed world. So the impact on our economy, and we have these, enormous income inequality, gaps and wealth gaps, but it starts with education gaps. And so if we don't have, a pretty equally educated population, then we're going to exacerbate these gaps, and it's going to be, a drag on our economy. And so we've got this effort through our school consulting arm and through, we're very data-driven. We get a nightly upload of student data on about 1 million students, so we can see what's working and not working in these schools. And it's not that all the schools are failing. In fact, USC just did a very important study of students of all the schools in Los Angeles. There's 2,068 public and charter schools in Los Angeles, and only about 11% of public schools and about 20% of charter schools are really closing that achievement gap. And but it's not that we don't know how to do it at all. So on one hand, that's discouraging that only 1 in 5, 1 in 10 schools are closing the achievement gap. On the other hand, it's not that nobody is. So there's several hundred schools in Los Angeles County alone that are doing this. And so we think that there's an opportunity and there's an urgency to take what these high-performing low-income schools are doing and replicate it more broadly so that every school can close the achievement gap. And we think we know how to do it, not just think together, but the collective we as schools and as a society. So I think we have to get after it and really make an effort to close the achievement gap for 2 million kids.
Give us an idea of what those things need to be done are. What is it that first separates those kids so that they don't perform as well? And what is it that once you give it to them, they do?
Well, so kids that live in poverty, they have parents oftentimes with low education levels, and they're in impoverished conditions, and they don't have the same tutors and enrichment resources and those kinds of things. But oftentimes we use that as an excuse and say, well, that's it, and we can't overcome that. But there are, like I said, several hundred schools just in Los Angeles County alone that have those same conditions but have overcome them. And it starts with expectations from the adults in the system. And so George W. Bush talked about when they did No Child Left Behind, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And we see that in spades. And it's not that people are racist, but people are actually trying to be kind. It's like, oh, these poor kids, their parents aren't educated and they don't speak English and blah, 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 blah. And so we're going to lower our expectations for them. Well, kids rise to the expectations. So if you lower the expectations, you put them in remedial classes, and then you have remedial on the remedial classes. Guess what? You're not performing on grade level if you're not even being taught on grade level. And so really the number one thing that we do is to reset expectations, and not just changing the beliefs, but stripping out the remedial education and putting in, so everybody gets high expectations, and then putting in the supports, the after-school programs, the interventions during the school day, and all the different support systems that exist in schools, but target them to the kids that need them the most and strip away the remedial classes and reset expectations high for everybody.
So where is some of the best work being done? Is it in the charter schools over the traditional public schools? Is it just as much in the public schools? Because in the media we hear, oh, charter schools, they do,
Yep.
they have an advantage. The parents want their kids to get a better education. They're probably on top of their kids to do their homework. The schools, if you don't meet the criteria, you're out, and some have a little stricter boundaries. The regular public schools are the last resort because they have to take you, and there's disruption problems. Where is the genesis for the best success?
Well, we think that that's a false narrative. I think it's a charter school is just a governance structure. At the end of the day, you still got to run a good school. That's how you're organized, and there's some obstacles in the way the public school system is set up, and they're difficult, but they're not overcomable. So there, as I mentioned, this USC study shows that about 20% of charter schools in Los Angeles County, it's a big sample group, so it's a couple thousand schools, 20% of charters are doing a good job, and about 11%. So neither one's doing all that great. But there's a set of schools in Southeast LA that's very interesting. And so there's a small elementary school district in Southeast LA that we work in called Little Lake. And this is where when we were doing after-school programs, we saw our kids in Little Lake Elementary School District, which is in the Santa Fe Springs area, so it's elementary and middle schools. And 100% of their schools are closing the achievement gap. And then they roll up into the Whittier Union High School District, and 100% of the Whittier Union High School District schools are closing the achievement gap. And what's interesting about Whittier Union High School District, there was another study by Michael Fullen, who's a very esteemed international educator and researcher. And in the Fullen study, it showed that Whittier Union High School District is one of only a handful of high school or K-12 districts that have had 15 consecutive years of unbroken increases in student achievement. And they did it all while the community was becoming poorer and more Latino. And so there's examples of what they do. And so what these folks have done is they've adopted this very data-driven methodology of focusing their work. And so they help teachers really unpack and understand what the standards are, which are just your goals. What do you want kids to know in this class or this grade level by the end of the year? And back map their lesson plans very systematically so that they hit those targets. Seems easy. It's just reverse engineering, but a lot of people don't do it. And then they differentiate instruction in the classroom, because in any classroom you have high-performing kids, low-performing kids, kids in the middle. And a normal teacher is going to teach to the middle, and so the kids that are advanced get bored, and the kids that are behind are lost. And so what they do is they do a combination of whole group instruction where everybody gets the same kind of level setting. Here's our expectations, and then they break down into quadrants, and they challenge the high-performing kids with a different curriculum and the low-performing kids with more supports, so you can move everybody toward those goals. And if you do that, and then upstream at a district level or principal level, then you're allocating your interventions, your supports, your teacher coaches, your resources around this kind of data-driven framework. And it's very systematic, it's very organized, it's highly collaborative, and when you start having success, morale goes up and people are on board. And so it's kind of, to me, it's like synchronized swimming.
Yeah. With that, we got to leave it there. If folks want to learn more about Think Together, where can they go?
They can take a look at our website at www.thinktogether.org.
I want to thank you so much. My guest has been Randy Barth, who's the CEO and founder of Think Together. We've been discussing that on today's program, and we thank you so much for taking the time to share it with our listeners, and much continued success to you.
Thank you very much, Larry. Appreciate the opportunity to be on.